The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's parade ground as hundreds of soldiers assembled for the monthly honors ceremony. The crisp autumn air carried the sound of polished boots on concrete and the rustle of freshly pressed uniforms. Among the ranks stood a group of recent graduates from basic training, their faces bright with the confidence that comes from surviving the crucible of military preparation. Private Marcus Thompson adjusted his dress uniform one final time, running his fingers along the sharp creases his drill instructor had demanded. At 22, he stood tall and proud, his chest decorated with the basic ribbons every new soldier received upon graduation. Beside him, Private Jennifer Walsh checked her appearance in the reflection of her belt buckle, equally meticulous about her presentation. "Look at this place," Marcus whispered to his fellow rookies as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "Finally feels real, doesn't it? We're actually soldiers now." Private David Chen nodded enthusiastically from Marcus's other side. 18 weeks of hell, but we made it through. Now we get to stand with the real warriors." The three had formed a tight bond during their training, supporting each other through the physical challenges, academic requirements, and mental pressure that transformed civilians into soldiers. They had graduated in the top 10% of their class, earning the respect of their instructors and the right to serve in one of the military's most prestigious units. As they scanned the assembled troops, their eyes fell upon an older man standing several rows ahead. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and weathered hands that spoke of decades of hard work. His uniform hung slightly loose on his frame, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had endured much over the years. "Who invited Grandpa to the party?" Jennifer muttered under her breath, causing her companions to stifle laughs. The elderly man seemed oblivious to their commentary, standing at attention with a discipline that suggested deep familiarity with military protocol. His uniform bore fewer ribbons than many of the younger soldiers, and what decorations he did wear appeared faded and worn. Marcus studied the man more closely, noting his posture and bearing. "Probably some retired guy they let hang around for ceremonies. Look at those old ribbons. Must be from way back when things were easier." "Different time back then," David agreed quietly. "Not like what we went through in training. These old-timers tell stories about the good old days, but they never faced the intensity we did." The rookies had heard plenty of stories from older veterans during their training, tales that seemed increasingly embellished with each telling. They had learned to take such accounts with considerable skepticism, especially after their drill instructors had warned them about veterans who exaggerated their service records to impress younger soldiers. As the ceremony began, Colonel Harrison took his position at the podium, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled troops through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to honor service, sacrifice, and the continuing tradition of excellence that defines our military community." The formal proceedings included recognition of recent promotions, commendations for outstanding service, and acknowledgement of soldiers preparing for deployment. Marcus and his friends listened respectfully, still adjusting to the rhythm of military ceremonies after months of intensive training. "Today, we also welcome our newest soldiers," Colonel Harrison continued. "Young men and women who have completed their basic training and now join our ranks as full members of this military family." Marcus felt a surge of pride as his training class was recognized, their achievement representing months of dedication and hard work. They had earned their place among these seasoned warriors through determination and sacrifice. During a brief intermission, the rookies found themselves standing near the elderly veteran they had noticed earlier. Up close, they could see that his hands bore numerous small scars, and his eyes held a distant quality that suggested he had seen things beyond their experience. "Excuse me, sir," Jennifer said with barely concealed condescension. "Are you a guest here today? If you need help finding a seat, we'd be happy to assist you." The old man looked at her with mild surprise, then smiled gently. Thank you for the offer, young lady, but I'm fine standing with everyone else. Marcus stepped forward, his tone equally patronizing. We just graduated from basic training, sir. The standards these days are incredibly demanding, probably much tougher than what you experienced back in your time. I'm sure they are, the veteran replied calmly, showing no irritation at their assumption about his background. David couldn't resist adding his own commentary. The physical requirements alone would surprise you. We had to master combat techniques that probably didn't even exist during your service. The old man nodded thoughtfully. Military training certainly has evolved over the years. Each generation faces its own challenges. His diplomatic response only reinforced the rookies' belief that they were speaking with someone whose service had been relatively comfortable compared to their own rigorous preparation. They had endured sleep deprivation, extreme physical conditioning, advanced weapons training, and psychological pressure designed to forge them into elite fighters. As the ceremony resumed, the rookies exchanged knowing glances, comfortable in their assumption that they represented the pinnacle of military training and dedication. They had survived a selection process that eliminated nearly 40% of their starting class, emerging as the cream of their generation's military talent. The elderly veteran returned his attention to the proceedings, maintaining perfect military bearing despite the subtle mockery he had endured. His presence seemed almost out of place among the younger, more physically imposing soldiers surrounding him. Colonel Harrison returned to the podium for the ceremony's concluding remarks. Before we dismiss, I want to take a moment to address something that has been weighing on my mind. The crowd grew quiet, sensing a shift in the formal atmosphere. The colonel's expression had become more serious, his voice carrying a gravity that commanded immediate attention. Throughout my career, I have had the privilege of serving alongside extraordinary individuals whose contributions to our military and our nation often go unrecognized. Today, I stand before you with one such individual among our ranks. Marcus and his friends listened politely, assuming the colonel was about to deliver a standard speech about honoring veterans and maintaining military traditions. It has come to my attention that some of our newer soldiers may not fully understand the depth of service and sacrifice represented by all members of our military community, regardless of age or appearance. The colonel's words carried a subtle rebuke that made several younger soldiers shift uncomfortably, though Marcus and his friends remained oblivious to any criticism directed their way. I want to share a story with you today about courage, dedication, and the kind of service that defines the very best of our military tradition. The assembled troops listened intently as Colonel Harrison prepared to continue, unaware that his next words would fundamentally challenge everything the rookies thought they knew about military service and heroism. The autumn wind picked up slightly, rustling the flags that surrounded the parade ground and adding a sense of solemnity to the moment. The elderly veteran stood quietly among the ranks, his expression unchanged, as he waited for whatever revelation the colonel was preparing to share. Marcus glanced toward the old man one more time, still convinced that they were about to hear a routine acknowledgement of past service, nothing that would change his opinion about the relative ease of earlier military generations compared to their own demanding preparation. The stage was set for a revelation that would transform their understanding of true military heroism and the quiet dignity of those who had served before them. The colonel cleared his throat and began to speak, his words about to bridge the gap between assumption and reality, between youthful confidence and genuine respect for extraordinary service. Colonel Harrison's gaze swept across the assembled soldiers before settling momentarily on the elderly veteran standing quietly among the ranks. The colonel's expression carried a weight that suggested the story he was about to tell held profound significance for everyone present. 53 years ago, the colonel began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent parade ground. A young soldier named Robert Mitchell volunteered for one of the most dangerous missions in military history. He was 24 years old, fresh from advanced combat training, and had already distinguished himself as an exceptional marksman and tactical strategist. Marcus felt his stomach tighten slightly as he noticed the colonel's eyes briefly scanning the area where he and his fellow rookies stood. The elderly veteran they had dismissed remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Sergeant Mitchell was selected for a classified reconnaissance mission deep behind enemy lines during one of the most intense periods of the conflict. His unit's objective was to gather intelligence about enemy positions that would be crucial for a major offensive operation. The colonel paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle over the crowd. Several veterans in the audience nodded knowingly, recognizing the type of mission that required extraordinary courage and skill. The mission went wrong from the beginning. Enemy forces had detected their infiltration, and Sergeant Mitchell's 8-man team found themselves surrounded in hostile territory with no immediate possibility of extraction. Radio communication was compromised, supplies were limited, and they faced overwhelming enemy numbers. Jennifer found herself listening more intently than she had expected, caught up in the colonel's narrative despite her earlier dismissiveness about older veterans and their stories. For 6 days and nights, Sergeant Mitchell kept his team alive through tactical brilliance and sheer determination. He coordinated their movements through treacherous terrain, rationed their limited supplies, and maintained group morale despite increasingly desperate circumstances. The colonel's voice grew more intense as he continued the account. On the 7th day, when enemy forces had nearly cornered them, Sergeant Mitchell made a decision that would define not only his own character, but also save the lives of every man under his command. David noticed that several senior officers in the crowd were watching the elderly veteran with expressions of deep respect, their faces reflecting an understanding that went beyond mere ceremonial politeness. Realizing that his team's only chance of survival required a diversion, Sergeant Mitchell volunteered to separate from the group and draw enemy fire away from their position. Armed with only his service rifle and 2 magazines of ammunition, he positioned himself on a rocky outcrop that provided clear fields of fire but offered minimal protection. The parade ground had become completely silent except for the colonel's voice and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees that bordered the base. Even the youngest soldiers sensed they were hearing something extraordinary. For 3 hours, Sergeant Mitchell held that position alone, engaging multiple enemy squads while his teammates moved to a more defensible location. He eliminated 17 confirmed enemy combatants and wounded numerous others, all while under constant fire from superior numbers. Marcus felt his earlier confidence beginning to waver as the scope of the story became clear. This was not the type of exaggerated tale they had been warned to expect from older veterans. The colonel's precise details and matter-of-fact delivery suggested authentic military history. When Sergeant Mitchell's ammunition ran out, he didn't retreat. Instead, he used captured enemy weapons and continued fighting, buying his team precious additional time. Enemy forces eventually overran his position, but not before his 7 teammates had reached safety and established contact with friendly forces. The colonel's next words carried a solemnity that made several listeners hold their breath. Sergeant Mitchell was captured, severely wounded, and held as a prisoner of war for 14 months. During that time, he endured interrogation, torture, and conditions that would have broken most men. He revealed nothing of value to enemy interrogators, protecting operational security and the safety of countless fellow soldiers. Jennifer's earlier smugness had completely disappeared, replaced by growing awareness that they might have seriously misjudged the quiet old man standing nearby. After his eventual rescue and recovery, Sergeant Mitchell was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Purple Hearts, and numerous other commendations recognizing his extraordinary service. But his story doesn't end there. Colonel Harrison turned slightly, his gaze now clearly directed toward the elderly veteran. Following his recovery, Sergeant Mitchell returned to active duty and continued serving with distinction for another 31 years. He completed 6 additional combat deployments, commanded 3 different units, and mentored hundreds of young soldiers throughout his career. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. The old man they had patronized and dismissed was not some comfortable retiree who had enjoyed easy service during peaceful times. He was one of the most decorated heroes in military history. During his 3 decades of continued service, the colonel continued, Sergeant Mitchell, later Colonel Mitchell, developed many of the advanced combat training techniques that are still used today. The tactical strategies you learned in basic training, the psychological preparation methods that tested your mental toughness, and the leadership principles that shaped your development as soldiers all bear the influence of his innovations. David felt his face burning with embarrassment as he realized the magnitude of their mistake. The training they had been so proud of completing, the standards they thought represented peak military achievement, had been designed by the very man they had condescendingly offered to help find a seat. Colonel Mitchell retired from active duty 22 years ago, but his contribution to our military community never ended. He has spent the past 2 decades volunteering with veterans organizations, counseling wounded warriors, and supporting the families of fallen soldiers. His foundation has provided educational scholarships for over 4,000 military children. The colonel's voice grew even more pointed as he addressed the broader implications of his story. Colonel Mitchell embodies the finest traditions of military service, not just the heroism displayed in combat, but the quiet dignity, continued service, and selfless dedication that define true military character. Several soldiers were now looking openly toward the elderly veteran, their expressions reflecting newfound understanding and respect. The old man continued standing at attention, apparently unmoved by the attention his story was generating. I share this account today because I believe it's essential for all of us, regardless of rank or experience, to remember that appearances can be deceiving. The soldier standing next to you may carry a history of service and sacrifice that exceeds your imagination. Marcus wanted to disappear into the ground. Every word the colonel spoke emphasized how thoroughly they had embarrassed themselves and dishonored the very values they claimed to represent as new soldiers. Military service is not about comparing generations or dismissing the contributions of those who served before us. It's about recognizing that courage, dedication, and sacrifice come in many forms, often wearing the faces of quiet humility rather than obvious display. The colonel paused, allowing his message to resonate with the assembled troops. Colonel Mitchell has attended our monthly ceremonies for the past 5 years, not seeking recognition or acknowledgement, but simply maintaining his connection to the military community that has been his life's work. Jennifer realized that their behavior had not only been disrespectful to an individual veteran, but had violated fundamental principles of military courtesy and honor that should have guided their interactions with all service members. Today's ceremony was intended to recognize outstanding service and welcome our newest soldiers into our military family. I hope it has also reminded us that true military excellence is measured not by age, appearance, or the loudness of one's claims, but by the depth of one's service and the character demonstrated both in and out of uniform. Colonel Harrison's final words carried unmistakable authority. I expect every soldier here today to reflect on what we can learn from Colonel Mitchell's example. Not just his combat heroism, but his lifetime commitment to serving others and his gracious response to disrespect with dignity. The ceremony concluded with the formal dismissal, but the impact of the colonel's revelation continued to reverberate through the crowd. Soldiers who had been unaware of the elderly veteran's identity now approached him with expressions of genuine respect and gratitude. Marcus, Jennifer, and David remained frozen in place, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their mistake and uncertain how to address the damage they had caused. The man they had treated with such casual condescension was not just a decorated war hero, but a living legend whose influence on their own military training had been profound and lasting. As the crowd began to disperse following Colonel Harrison's dismissal, Marcus stood paralyzed with mortification. Around them, soldiers approached Colonel Mitchell with respectful handshakes and brief conversations, their reverence obvious in every gesture. The three rookies watched from a distance, each wrestling with the crushing weight of their behavior. "We need to apologize," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible above the general conversation surrounding them. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine shame about how they had treated a genuine American hero. David nodded miserably. "How do you apologize for something like this? We basically insulted a Medal of Honor recipient to his face. We told him our training was harder than anything he experienced." Marcus watched as Colonel Mitchell spoke quietly with several senior officers, his demeanor unchanged despite the recognition he had just received. The old soldier's grace under pressure extended even to this moment of public acknowledgement. "Look at him," Marcus said quietly. "He's not even acting like anything happened. After everything the colonel just told us about what he's done. He's still just humble." For 20 minutes, the rookies remained rooted in place, watching as various soldiers and officers paid their respects to Colonel Mitchell. Each interaction they witnessed emphasized the depth of respect the veteran commanded from people who understood military service at its highest levels. Finally, as the crowd thinned and Colonel Mitchell stood relatively alone near the edge of the parade ground, Marcus gathered his courage. "We're going over there. Whatever happens, we owe him a proper apology." The three approached slowly, their earlier swagger replaced by genuine nervousness. Colonel Mitchell noticed their approach and turned toward them with the same mild, patient expression he had worn during their earlier encounter. "Colonel Mitchell, sir," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly as he came to attention. "We owe you an enormous apology for our behavior before the ceremony." The elderly veteran studied them for a moment, his weathered face showing no anger or resentment. "At ease, soldiers. No need for such formality." Jennifer stepped forward, struggling to find words adequate for their situation. "Sir, we had no idea who you were or what you had accomplished. Our comments were completely inappropriate and disrespectful." "We thought—" David started, then stopped, realizing how foolish their assumptions would sound when spoken aloud. Colonel Mitchell smiled gently. "You thought you were talking to some old-timer whose service couldn't compare to your rigorous modern training. I understand." His directness about their attitude somehow made their embarrassment worse. Marcus felt his face burning as he realized the veteran had been fully aware of their condescension from the beginning. "What you accomplished, sir," Marcus continued, "the mission behind enemy lines, surviving as a prisoner of war, your years of continued service, we can't even imagine going through something like that. And the training techniques," Jennifer added. "Colonel Harrison said you developed many of the methods we went through in basic training. We were so proud of completing that program, and it turns out you created it." Colonel Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Military training has evolved significantly over the decades. Each generation faces new challenges and develops new capabilities. Your training was indeed demanding, probably more technically sophisticated than what I experienced initially." His measured response surprised them. Despite their disrespectful treatment, he wasn't dismissing their accomplishments or making them feel worse about their mistake. "But, sir," David protested, "what you went through in combat, being captured and tortured, that's real courage. We've never been tested like that." "Courage isn't just what happens in combat," Colonel Mitchell replied calmly. "It's how you handle mistakes, how you treat others, how you grow from your failures. What you're doing right now, coming over here to apologize when you could have just walked away, that takes character." Marcus was struck by the veterans' ability to find something positive in their behavior even after they had treated him so poorly. This gracious response somehow made their initial rudeness seem even worse. "Is there anything we can do to make up for how we acted?" Jennifer asked earnestly. Colonel Mitchell considered the question seriously. "Tell me about your plans now that you've completed basic training. What brought you to military service?" For the next 30 minutes, the three rookies found themselves in an unexpected conversation with the man they had initially dismissed. Colonel Mitchell asked thoughtful questions about their backgrounds, their motivation for joining the military, and their career aspirations. Marcus discovered that the veteran was genuinely interested in their perspectives on modern military life. Despite his vast experience, Colonel Mitchell listened to their observations about contemporary training methods and technological advances without condescension. "The weapon systems you learned are certainly more sophisticated than what I used," Colonel Mitchell acknowledged. "The communication equipment, the tactical gear, all impressive advances." David was amazed by the veterans' willingness to engage with them as equals despite their earlier behavior. "But you had to do everything with much more basic equipment. That must have made everything harder." "Different tools, different challenges," Colonel Mitchell replied. "Every generation of soldiers adapts to their circumstances and finds ways to accomplish the mission. That's what military service is about, adapting and overcoming regardless of the situation." As their conversation continued, the rookies began to understand that Colonel Mitchell's greatest lesson wasn't about his individual heroism, but about the continuous nature of military service. He spoke about his career not as a series of personal achievements, but as part of an ongoing tradition of service and sacrifice. "You know," Jennifer said thoughtfully, "when we first saw you, we thought you looked out of place here. Now I realize you belong here more than anyone." Colonel Mitchell smiled at her observation. "Military service doesn't end when you retire. It becomes part of who you are. These ceremonies, connecting with younger soldiers, staying involved in the community, it's all part of continuing to serve." Marcus found himself reflecting on how quickly their assumptions had been shattered. "Sir, we learned more in the past hour about what it means to be a soldier than we did in weeks of classroom instruction." "Experience is a powerful teacher," Colonel Mitchell agreed, "but so is humility. The willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them is what separates good soldiers from great ones." As the afternoon wore on, other soldiers occasionally approached to speak with Colonel Mitchell, and the rookies witnessed consistently respectful interactions. They began to understand that his reputation within the military community was built not just on past heroism, but on continued character and service. Colonel Harrison appeared near the end of their conversation, approaching the group with evident satisfaction at seeing the rookies engaged in respectful dialogue with the veteran. "Colonel Mitchell," Harrison said, "I hope our newest soldiers haven't been monopolizing too much of your time." "Not at all," Colonel Mitchell replied. "They're good soldiers who made an honest mistake. We've been having an excellent conversation about military service and the importance of not judging people by appearances." Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. "An important lesson for all of us. Colonel Mitchell, would you consider speaking to our next group of basic training graduates? I think your perspective would be valuable for them." "I'd be honored," Colonel Mitchell answered immediately. As the gathering finally broke up, the three rookies found themselves fundamentally changed by their experience. Their pride in their recent accomplishments remained, but it was now tempered by genuine respect for those who had served before them and awareness of how much they still had to learn. "Colonel Mitchell," Marcus said as they prepared to part ways, "thank you for not treating us the way we deserved to be treated today." The elderly veteran shook hands with each of them firmly. "Remember this feeling," he advised. "Not the embarrassment, but the growth that comes from it. Military service is about continuous learning and improvement. Today was just another step in your development as soldiers." Walking back to their barracks, the three rookies moved in contemplative silence. Their morning's arrogance had been replaced by hard-earned wisdom about respect, humility, and the true nature of military service. "I never want to feel this stupid again," David said finally. "Then remember this day," Jennifer replied. "And remember that every person we meet might have a story we can't imagine." Marcus nodded in agreement. "From now on, we treat every veteran like they might be Colonel Mitchell. Because they might be." Their encounter with Colonel Mitchell had taught them that true military excellence wasn't about comparing themselves to others or dismissing different generations of service. It was about respect, humility, and understanding that heroism often comes in quiet, unassuming packages. The ceremony they had attended expecting routine recognition had become a transformative experience that would shape their entire approach to military service. They had learned that wisdom and courage don't always announce themselves loudly, and that the most important lessons often come from the most unexpected sources. As evening fell over Fort Braxton, the three newly educated soldiers reflected on how a single conversation had changed their understanding of what it truly meant to wear the uniform and serve their country with honor.